this kind of introduction. First of all, I would like to, of course, once again, on behalf of all my colleagues at the Egyptian IVF Center, welcome you. And also I would like to thank the supporting companies, particularly IPSA and FERIC, for supporting this meeting. I know I want to address a very controversial issue, and I'm sure that there will be lots of disagreement. But what I'm going to try to bring to you the up-to-date evidence in this issue, and that's IUI in the area of ART. Because currently some people would say, well, IUI is useless, you should not do it. And some of the good organizations actually say this, some of the reputable organizations, and others will say, no, I think it has a place. So let us address this topic. And during this time I'll wait for it. First of all, I'll just remind all of us about the probabilities of spontaneous conception, because sometimes spontaneous conception even is better than what we offer some of our patients with our IVF or even IUI. And I think we have to bear this in mind, because we're not propagating IVF for everybody. We are propagating IVF for ICSI for those who need it, and therefore there must be an indication for that. Others also, what is IUI, and then what are the indications of IUI, and what is the controversy in IUI, and what is today's evidence. And then finally can reach to some concluding remarks. I will start with the natural conception, and I remind you of the Dutch model. Sorry, the pointer is not working, but the Dutch model would say that when you are looking at the probability of pregnancy, you have to look at the age of the patient, the duration of infertility, the parameters of the sperm analysis in this patient, and also whether she was referred by a specialist or not, because the specialist is supposed to know some of the basics for the treatment of this patient. And they included the postcoital, which is really not very welcomed by most of the scientific bodies. And that is the Dutch model, and it shows with the curve below that if you have young patients who is infertile for a period of 3 or 4 years with a reasonable sperm parameter, then you may have chances of spontaneous conception of almost 3%. And they give it its score. And if you have a score less than 30, then you have a fair chance of spontaneous pregnancy. If you have a score of more than 30, then you have a poor chance of a spontaneous pregnancy. In addition to this Dutch model, there was also the New Zealand model, which again showed that you do have a good chance of spontaneous pregnancy if the patient is young, if the duration of fertility is little, less than 3 or 4 years, and if the sperm parameters are reasonable. And this, of course, goes in agreement with what Alan Templeton, a long time ago, suggested concerning the prognosis for infertile patients. And when you look at the curves, whether the New Zealand or the Dutch curve, they are almost coinciding with each other. And I thought I'd start this talk by this fact to remind all of us of the chance of spontaneous conception when we are seeing our patients who are coming asking for our help. Then let me move to IUI. What is IUI? The rationale behind intrauterine insemination with homologous sperm is bypassing the cervical mucus barrier and increasing the number of motile spermatozoa with a high proportion of normal forms at the site of fertilization. This interest in IUI is undoubtedly associated with the refinement techniques for the preparation of the MOH No motile spermatozoa. And the washing procedures are necessary, one, to remove the prostaglandins, infectious agents, antigenic proteins, non-motile spermatozoa, leukocytes, and immature germ cells. This may enhance sperm quality by decreasing the formation of the free oxygen radicals after sperm preparation, and the final result is an improved fertilizing capacity of the sperm in vitro and even in vivo. So what are the current indications for IUI with the semen preparation? Most of us with the male factor, subfertility, unexplained fertility, endometriosis with patent tubes, mild, moderate endometriosis, combined ovulatory and male factor fertility, and some added area of cervical and immunological infertility and fertilities, and of course certainly sexual dysfunction and fertility. As you can see, for the first 5 indications, we have to look into the randomized controlled trial to look for the evidence. But when you go to the sexual dysfunction and fertility, I don't think you can go for randomized controlled trial, because you cannot try to drop yourself from a plane with a parachute and drop yourself from the plane without the parachute to prove that the parachute will save your life. Because when you have sexual dysfunction, then the patient, the male partner is unable to impregnate his wife with the sperm. So certainly if you allow the sperm to reach to the genital tract of the female, then certainly you will have a better chance than not doing anything. And consequently, certainly no one can doubt the value of IUI in the presence of sexual dysfunction where non-consummation of marriage occurs between the 2 partners. However, controversy indeed surrounded the effectiveness of the IUI for the other indications, whether unexplained infertility, male factor infertility, or cervical factor infertility. And as I mentioned earlier on, this came from various studies, and you can see the old studies that have looked into the value of IUI, and they indicated that the number needed to treat, that is to increase the pregnancy by 1 pregnancy for IUI, you will have to treat 32 people to increase the pregnancy by 1. If you are using IUI with clomiphene citrate, then because of pregnancy rate of 7%, then you have to treat 14 patients to get 1 more pregnancy. And if you do IUI with FSH, then you will have to treat 11 patients to have 1 more pregnancy. And of course, they looked at the IVF. If you do IVF, then you only need to treat 4 patients to have 1 more pregnancy, because you have a pregnancy rate of 30%. So people said, why should we do IUI? There's no point of IUI, because IVF is far better than IUI. And also, all of us have great respect for ESHRI and for its consortium, and the ESHRI Capri workshop group headed by our great friend Professor Rossignani have looked into the IUI in the year 2009, and they came up with this recommendation that stimulated IUI is ineffective in male infertility, and the effect on other diagnosis is small. And they base this on these facts, that if you do IUI with clomiphene citrate, you have a pregnancy rate of 7%. If you do it with FSH, you have a pregnancy rate of 12%. And if you do it with FSH, then you have multiple pregnancy of 13%. So you have multiple pregnancy, high multiple pregnancy, and you have low pregnancy rates. So why should you do IUI? And therefore, the Capri workshop group concluded that IUI in stimulated cycles may be considered while waiting for IVF. In other words, you are just doing it just for the sake of time till the patient has IVF. Or when in women with patent tubes, IVF is not affordable. A patient would never be able to go for IVF. And that was the conclusion of the ESHRI workshop group in Capri. However, when we look into the studies on which the group based their conclusions and concluding remarks, we find that most of the studies they are heterogeneous, and the studies vary in the comparison of the study group, the use of none or unuse of mild ovarian hyperstimulation, number of insemination, the treatment cycles used, the different sites of insemination, intrauterine, cervical or fallopian sperm perfusion, various methods of sperm preparation, use or non-use of additive antioxidants. So the studies were heterogeneous, and consequently, not really, they come up to a solid conclusion from these studies. But when you look at the realities and what's happening on the ground, if you go to the ICMAR group, which is the International Committee of Monitoring of ART, which collects data from all over the world, and look, in the year 2008, there were 160,000 cycles of IUI performed in the world. And in the year 2010, there were almost 200,000 cycles of IUI being performed around the world. And if you look at the delivery rate, it was 9% in the year 2008 and almost 9% in the year 2010. And if you look at the multiple pregnancy rate, it was 11 in the year 2008 and 10% in the year 2010. And that's globally. But some of us will say, oh, well, that's ICMAR is collecting data from developing countries and these don't have proper records, etc. So let us look into more reliable information coming from the ESHRI reports. And that's from the ESHRI report for the year 2008 from 36 countries in Europe who report their cycles and outcome of cycles, well documented. IUI, whether you're using husband or donor insemination, it has a delivery rate of 10%, it has twin rate of 11%, and 30.8%. And IVF has delivery rate of 22%, multiple pregnancy in Europe of 22%, and the triple of 1.1%. So you can see that there is a reasonable delivery rate, there is a lower multiple pregnancy rate than IVF. But also when you look at the number of cycles being performed in Europe, look at this, it is almost 170,000 cycles that performed, and the IVF were 260,000 cycles performed. So it's almost 2/3 of the number of the IVF cycles had been IUI. So if it was ineffective method, and method only for those people who cannot afford, or you just do it for those who are waiting, how come that we perform all these number of cycles? And I think if you look at the pregnancy rate and pregnancy rate, then you can come to the answer why this procedure is being performed. Now, the two main indications that I mentioned earlier on, the unexplained infertility. A very recent study came out from the National Institute of Child Health and Human Development, the NICHD, published in the New England Journal of Medicine in the year 2015, the MOH trial. They looked into 12 clinical sites in the United States. I apologize for the mistake. It is 12 clinical sites in the United States, composing of 900 couples with unexplained infertility, aged between 18 and 40 years old, up to not everybody had, up to 4 controlled ovarian hyperstimulation treatment cycle with IUI. So what was the result of the study? The result of this MOH study, which is well-documented study, prospective randomized trial, the live birth rate with letrozole was 18%, with gonadotrophic stimulation 32%, and with clomiphene it was 23%. Interesting information in this study that incidence of congenital malformation with letrozole, in fact, was less than clomiphene citrate. So this is just to dispel the old misconception that if you give letrozole, then you are having a higher incidence of congenital malformation. And this is a very well-documented study performed in a large number of centers in the United States of America. And then what about the male subfertility, the other indication? Indeed, a Cochrane review showed that IUI is superior to time intercourse, both in natural cycles and in stimulated cycle in the year 2000, as shown in the Cochrane review. And based on this and other information, William Pomplay from GEM proposed this algorithm for treatment of male factor infertility that they do in fertility workup in making sure that the tubes are patent by mesocervical or laparoscopy or hydrosonography. And if there's no tubal factor, we do the washing procedure. If you have insemination motile count more than 1 million, then you may go for trials of IUI. If the patient gets pregnant, well and good. If she doesn't get pregnant, then you shift her to ICSI. Or, on the other side, if you have insemination motile count less than 1 million and morphology less than 5%, then you go straight away to ICSI and you don't waste your time. If you have in between, that is insemination motile count less than 1 million, but morphology is more than 5, then you may go for IUI. If the patient doesn't get pregnant, then you go for ICSI. And that algorithm is based on the information in the literature and in the publication. But the breaking news actually came from the study which came from the Netherlands. And in fact, this study, when it was designed in 17 centers in the Netherlands. And the objective actually of that study is to prove that IUI is useless and you should not use it. But regrettably for the investigators, the outcome of the result is completely the opposite. Let us look at this Belgian study. It was published in the British Medical Journal in the year 2015 and was multicentric, randomized, controlled, non-inferiority trial in couples with unexplained or mild male factor infertility, as I mentioned, in 17 centers in the Netherlands. What did they find? They have a randomization. They have group 1, 200 patients, coupled with 3 cycles of IVF with single embryo transfer. Group 2, another 200 patients, up to 6 cycles of IVF in a modified natural cycle. And in group 3, again, 200 patients with up to 6 cycles of IUI with controlled ovarian stimulation. And I say up to because they followed up these patients for 1 year since the beginning of the treatment. Some of the patients got spontaneous pregnancy without IUI, without IVF. Some of the patients did not get pregnant with the first IUI, but they got pregnant with the second IUI, etc. But up to the 4 trials of IUI were performed and up to 3 cycles of natural, modified natural cycle. So what was the outcome of the study? The outcome of the study, the primary outcome of the study was the birth of a healthy child, not implantation rate, not pregnancy rate, not clinical pregnancy rate, it is the birth of a healthy child resulting from a single pregnancy conceived within 12 months after randomization. As I mentioned, they were followed for 12 months, and some of them, they were spontaneous pregnancy, some of them needed repeating quality. So what was the outcome? Look at this. The 3 groups, by the end of 1 year, the live birth rate of singleton was 50% in the 3 groups. Whether you did a stimulated cycle, whether you did modified natural cycle, whether you did IUI cycle. And that was 50%. So the conclusion of the study, all the 3 methods resulted in comparable proportion of healthy singleton, around 50%, and comparable proportion of multiple pregnancies. The multiple pregnancy was 6% for IVF, with single embryo transfer. The multiple pregnancy for the bilateral cycle was 5%, and for IUI was 7%. And I think this study really came out as a breakthrough in this regard and in the concept of IUI for unexplained infertility or for male factor infertility. And the authors concluded that there seems to be no reason to abandon IUI with controlled ovarian hyperstimulation as a first line of treatment, for couples with unexplained infertility or mild male factor infertility. This is cheaper, less invasive, and has no higher multiple pregnancy rate, as we have seen. But of course, when you are choosing this, you have to take into consideration the chances of spontaneous pregnancies, which I started off with in this presentation. The age of the patient, the duration of infertility, the parameters of the male factor of infertility, and the previous treatment which the patient received. And certainly in these cases, you will find many patients who would benefit from IUI and the advantage of IUI. But the more convincing evidence actually has come from this expert group, which was composed by the WHO, the HRP program, where we conducted expert groups to study various issues of infertility. One of them was the IUI, and others were PICO, etc. And the experts were chosen for this were four people, one from WHO and William Ombley and Cohen and Picard. And they looked into all the publications published in this regard. And they looked at all the publications published in this regard, and they subjected it to the analysis as indicated by the research units of the WHO. And the objective of this review was to provide a review of the evidence of 13 prioritized PICO questions that cover IUI with and without ovarian stimulation. I want to say that this study is not yet published. It is available on the web, on the online. It is coming up in Human Reproduction Update, and it is on the website since the 18th of February. So this is very recent, but it's not published yet. And so this study covered all the evidence, all the publications published on IUI since the year 1950 till the year 2015. All the publications they were reviewed and were analyzed, and only those with solid data were included. And when you say PICO questions, the PICO question, that is the population, study the population, the intervention, the comparison and outcome, and that is PICO question. That's the way WHO developed its guidelines on various issues. We're not interested in the outcome of the treatment per se, but to compare the outcome of the treatment with already existing treatment, like here, whether spontaneous conception or IUI. And that is what we mean by PICO question: population, intervention, comparison with what is already existing, and the outcome of the different procedure. And they looked into all the publication midline since the year 1950 till 2015, and they looked into the Cochrane publication till the year 2000, till May 2015. But also because it took a long time. This group was established more than 2 years ago, actually, almost 3 years ago. It takes a long time. So after the review of all this, then also they did a hand search of references in relevant reviews was performed up to January 2017. So this is really what we do have as today's evidence. And the quality of the evidence ranged from very low to high, with evidence that may be decades, but old, but of high quality. So all those evidence of high quality were included. However, we further, the authors further discussed where critical research gaps in evidence remain, because the objective of that group was not just to issue, but also to identify research gaps so that WHO can work on these gaps. And these are the 13 PICO questions which they addressed: when to initiate IUI, what are the indications, when ovarian stimulation needed, whether it is best to perform one cycle or many cycles, should we perform one insemination or more than one insemination, etc. And I'll go quickly through some of them. And the group, or authors of this, classified their recommendation on either that there is no evidence and therefore don't proceed with this based on solid evidence, and that's the red circle, or there is evidence, and so that's the green, and proceed with this based on solid evidence, or the amber, where there is insufficient evidence. So you may perform, you may not perform, but there is no sufficient evidence. And that's how they classify the impact of the various factors of IUI on the outcome of the treatment. So when they looked into the indication, they looked into the unexplained infertility, including minimal endometriosis with patent use with no distal tubal obstruction, male factor infertility, and cervical factor infertility. And the evidence was there. That's when to initiate IUI in infertile couple. Of course, we are aware of the paper which was published in the Lancet by Stewart and indicated that IUI with ovarian stimulation, there is no significant difference in IUI stimulated cycle versus expected management within the first 6 months. And that was the old reference which we had, and that, of course, is a very important reference. However, the updating of these references proved the opposite, and the conclusion of this evidence of this publication is no more valid because they had this Cochrane database in the year 2016, and then we have the intrauterine study which I referred to from the Netherlands. And this indeed came completely opposite to the publication in the Lancet in the year 2006. And so the summary of evidence for unexplained infertility based on Cochrane review 2016 that there is a significant increase in live births for women treated with IUI and ovarian stimulation compared with women treated with IUI only. And the recommendation for IUI for unexplained infertility, and that is IUI in natural cycle does not improve live birth rate, so don't do it. You don't do it in natural cycle, unexplained infertility, but you do it with a stimulated cycle in couple with unexplained infertility, and men with total motile sperm count more than 10 million. The prognosis of spontaneous pregnancy within a year, the way it was recommended by the group with intrauterine insemination with ovarian stimulation is the first choice, and that is conditional recommendation, and that's the green, which means you have to go with it to achieve a good pregnancy rate in these cases. So that's for the unexplained infertility based on the up-to-date evidence. What about IUI for male infertility? Well, again, the most relevant hits were the study by the group Edison, where, as I referred to earlier on, and also from the Cochrane database for the year 2016, and the authors found insemination evidence to determine whether there was any difference in the safety and effectiveness, and in couples, they concluded in couples with solely poor sperm quality, we cannot recommend for or against IUI. So in other words, in male factor infertility, there is some evidence, but it is not a solid evidence. And of course, this will depend on other factors as well, duration of infertility, age of the patient, sperm parameters, etc. So the evidence is not red or green, it is amber, and that is, you may go with it. There is some evidence, but the evidence is not solid. What about cervical factor infertility? Well, of course, this is a WHO expert group, so they indicated that IUI for cervical factor infertility, WHO recommends to no longer perform post-coital testing. So, he don't go by post-coital test at all, and that is red. You don't do it based on the evidence. When is ovarian stimulation required in IUI cycles? They looked also into this. As mentioned earlier, in couples with unexplained infertility, men with total motile sperm count more than 10 million, and the prognosis of spontaneous pregnancy less than 30, which I referred to in the first few slides of my presentation. That's a young patient, short duration of infertility, reasonable sperm parameter. The group recommended IUI with ovarian stimulation as the treatment of first choice, and that is green, which you can go with based on evidence. When is the best timing of insemination in IUI cycle? How would you go? How would you time the time of insemination? There were various things were recommended. The evidence for all the methods, whether HCG, whether the LH, whether ultrasonography, the evidence is really not solid, so no significant difference, whatever method you do for timing. And the evidence is of moderate quality. If HCG, but they included that if HCG injection is used, a single IUI can be performed anytime between 24 to 40 hours after HCG injection. So it is instead 24 hours to 40 hours after HCG injection without compromising pregnancy rate, and that's conditional recommendations. The IUI in natural cycle should be performed 1 day after the LH rise. And as I mentioned, there is evidence, but the evidence is not so robust. Now, what is the value of fallopian sperm perfusion? Because this has been propagated, that if you inject a larger volume to perfuse the fallopian tube, then you have a higher pregnancy rate. And when they reviewed all the studies, there was no difference compared to fallopian sperm perfusion. Intrauterine insemination should be the treatment of choice. And there's a strong recommendation, so don't do the fallopian sperm perfusion, because there is no evidence for that. What is the optimal number of IUI per cycle? Should we perform 1 IUI or should we perform 2 IUIs? There have been a number of publications on this, including the Cochrane database, 6 randomized controlled trial, and including the meta-analysis and including the randomized trials which were published. And you can see here that the prognosis goes for double intrauterine inseminations better than single intrauterine insemination. But when this expert group looked into the biggest study in this group, and that's the Louis study, which is 624 patients versus 633, that was the biggest one, they found that this study really influenced the outcome of the meta-analysis. But when they looked into the study was not robust, there was bias in the study, and consequently the evidence coming from this particular study, which influenced the outcome of the whole meta-analysis, was not valid. So they corrected for this, and when they corrected for this, they found that one trial they found that there is no difference between one IUI or 2 IUI. So it doesn't really matter whether you do single IUI or 2 IUI in the same cycle, you get the same results based on the correction of the data in the group study. What is the optimal number of IUI? Women, the undergoing IUI should be offered only a single insemination cycle, and that is strong recommendation. What is the ultimate number of IUI cycles? How many IUI cycles should be performed? There have been a number of applications on this with a meta-analysis. One of the group actually came from our group, from the Egyptian IVF Center, and the pregnancy rate was 18% after 3 cycles, 30% after 6 cycles, 41% after 9 cycles. And in patients, the conclusion of the group was in patients with an indication for IUI, they also suggested at least 3 IUI cycles should be performed, and there is insufficient evidence to recommend a maximum number of treatment cycles, and that's condition reflects. So you may perform 3 cycles, and evidence is modest, but you don't need to perform more than 3 cycles. What is the cost effectiveness of IUI versus IVF and ICSI? Is IVF served 2 different ways, more cost effective than IUI with controlled ovarian stimulation, and there is high level of evidence, and when they looked into the live birth rates of the IVF versus IUI, and they concluded that is in couples with unexplained infertility, in which the male partner has a total motile sperm count more than 10 million, and the prognosis less than 30, as I mentioned in the first few slides about the model, the Dutch model and the New Zealand model. And if the prognosis less than 30, it becomes pregnant spontaneously within 1 year. They recommended at least 3 cycles of IUI ovarian stimulation as the preferred treatment option compared to immediate IVF, since IUI is more cost-effective and yields a comparable pregnancy rate, and that is a strong recommendation. So it is more cost-effective than IVF. And when you look at the early complication of the year 2000, the early complication of the year 2000, where they studied the cost of a live birth, single live birth in the United States with IUI versus IVF, $10,000 compared to $43,000. In France, $5,000 compared to $13,000. In UK, $9,000 sterling, $9,000 versus $16,000. And of course, these were the year 2000. I'm sure now the cost is much more than this. The current costs for Egypt here, considering that live birth rate with IUI per cycle is 10%, so the patient will need 10 IUI to achieve a pregnancy. Considering that live birth rate with IVF is 30%, so the patient will need 3 cycles to have a baby. The cost of IUI is $1,600 US dollars, while the cost of IVF baby is $3,000, which is almost double the cost of IUI. So the other question is how to prevent multiples. How to prevent multiple? Of course, there are various complications of these issues, ovarian insemination protocol for intrauterine insemination women, and there are different recommendations on how to prevent the multiple pregnancy. The clomiphene citrate or tamoxifen are acceptable alternative to low dose gonadotropin, because as we have seen earlier on, the multiple pregnancy rate with clomiphene or letrozole is less than with FSH. And therefore, clomiphene citrate, the recommendation of the glucose, clomiphene citrate or tamoxifen are acceptable alternatives to low dose gonadotropin for low multiple pregnancy rate and lesser cost, of course, and also you have a lower live birth rate. Additionally, of GnRH agonist or antagonist for IUI, they are not effective, and we should not use these. And so how to prevent multiple? When gonadotropin are used in IUI or venous stimulation regimen with 75 international units or lower dose should be used at the higher, as higher dose have similar pregnancy rate while increasing multiple pregnancy. So there's no point to increase dose. You give a lower dose, and this is a solid evidence to support it. IUI and unprotected intercourse should be withheld. If you are doing IUI, you stimulate the patient, find multiple follicle, then you don't do IUI, and also ask your couple to abstain from having sexual intercourse. Otherwise, they will have multiple pregnancy or multiple pregnancy. And that is strong evidence not to go ahead with IUI when you have multiple follicles develop. And an alternative to this, you cancel the cycle, you aspirate the oocytes, or you may convert these to IVF if you do not have early rise of LH. Multifetal pregnancy reduction should not really be the solution for this. You should prevent it rather than doing multifetal pregnancy reduction. Before I come to the conclusion, I must thank my friend William Omblay, who is one of the authors of this paper, which will be appearing soon in Human Reproduction Update, for providing me with these slides, which are the outcome of the expert group, which was composed by WHO. He provided me with these slides just last week when we were together in Kampala at the IFFS meeting. So please look at the Human Reproduction Update and you find this publication. It is very, very informative publication, and indeed it is based on huge evidence, as I mentioned, since the year 1950 till today.
So, Madam Chairperson, if I may conclude, I can say that today's evidence shows that IUI with ovarian stimulation has a place. We cannot say it does not have a place as the ASHA recommendation was. It has a place in the management of unexplained infertility and mild to moderate male factor infertility. Before deciding on whether IVF or IUI, healthcare providers, that is we sitting around here, should consider the prognosis of a spontaneous pregnancy within a year, as I mentioned earlier on in the Dutch model and in the New Zealand model, considering the age of the female partner, the duration of infertility, the absence of distal tubal obstruction, and the severity of the male factor. But when we compare IUI with ART, it is not only the success rate which we are looking at, but we should look into the singleton live birth rate. You have seen in Europe, it is multiple pregnancy, 20%. The singleton live birth rate, the cost-effectiveness analysis, the compliance of the patient, the complications of the procedure, invasiveness of the technique, and the healthcare system cost, particularly for multiple pregnancy. We are very genuine here, and he can tell us how much premature babies would cost the healthcare system for admitting them into the neonatal intensive care unit and all this. And all these should be taken into consideration. They might not be the direct cost of the patient, but they are the cost of the healthcare system, which should be taken into consideration. Finally, I take the opportunity and invite you all to the coming 24th International Meeting of the Egyptian Fertility and State Society, scheduled to be held during the period 29th to 30th of November in the Marriott, but not, unfortunately, not Marriott Pyramids, it is Marriott Zamalek. So please join us, and also invite you to the Society of Endometriosis and Uterine Disorders, which is due to be held in April 26th to 28th of April in the beautiful city of Florence, where the Egyptian Fertility and State Society actually has a session during this meeting. And thank you very much.